to CharityVillage Connects. Today we're doing a checkup on our mental health, discussing how professionals in the nonprofit sector are coping with the stresses and challenges in the workplace, and what nonprofit leaders can do to support their well-being. I'm joined by Rensia Melles, founder of the Integral Workplace Health. Rensia Melles is a certified psychological health and safety advisor with over 20 years of experience managing and designing international employee support programs for Fortune 500 employers and nonprofit organizations. She's a passionate advocate for creating a difference in the workplace for both employers and employees on the topic of mental health and psychological safety. Welcome to CharityVillage Connects, Rensia.
Hi, Mary. Thanks for having me.
Now, you'll recall that last February, we published our first podcast episode tackling workplace mental health issues. With this being a follow-up and check-in on the issue, do you think that we're in a different space today than we were a year ago? What's changed from your perspective? Is the COVID pandemic continuing to play a factor in the mental health of Canadian employees, or is it easing as the restrictions have been lifted?
That's a really good question, because in many ways, the direct impact of COVID has changed. So the initial fear that everybody had around the illness, around adapting to the change and the impact that that had, the lockdowns, all of that, that is behind us now. But that doesn't mean that it's all done and dusted and all the healing has happened. So there are still ongoing situations, and we're still dealing with, workplace changes, relationship changes. So there's still a lot of indirect fallout that is ongoing. People have lingering issues of grief and anger around what happened, things that are unresolved, losses that they've suffered during the pandemic. Some people are still suffering, of course, from long COVID and dealing with disability because of that, with their cognitive functioning. Perhaps physical functioning is affected. But it's not as pervasive as it was. But it's still ongoing. So that's one of the fallouts that as a society and as workplaces, we're going to need to deal with around the people that are suffering with the long-term fallout from direct confrontation with the illness. The other thing, of course, has changed really our awareness of mental health. And it's also really brought to the foreground not just the openness and the need for mental health, but also the lack of mental health care that we have. So in that sense, some things have exacerbated because more people are identifying and there's not enough care for people there. And of course, we're still dealing with the fallout from people that perhaps were already struggling that have been exacerbated through the events. So, people that were already struggling with some level of anxiety and depression that was really exacerbated by the disruption. So even though it's not the COVID itself anymore, where people are really upset, people have made decisions about, it's kind of integrated into their daily life now. There's still a lot of fallout.
Last time we talked about the pandemic, you described it as a trauma event or a traumatic event, a mass traumatic event. Let's check in on this at that point. Do you see it as being an ongoing trauma that's still being experienced, or is it starting to heal?
You know what? For the majority of people, they're on the new normal. So, when we talked about the trauma, kind of like that curve and that cycle that people go through, they are kind of on that, trying to adjust, making a new normal. People are, ultimately really resilient. They make a new normal. They can adapt. They integrate things. So, a lot of the things, how we work, where we work, people created a new normal. There's, it's now normal that some people are wearing masks at the grocery store. And now we think about, I'm going into a small store. Should I wear a mask? I'm sitting in a car with somebody. These things are no longer big changes that we need to be thinking about. We've kind of made our peace with it. We make our decisions. Am I going to get my booster? When am I going to get my vaccine? So all of these things have become integrated. So people are, phenomenally resilient. And so we're kind of on the new normal piece. And what you're seeing, which I find is really interesting, is that a lot of the discussion that's going on and a lot of the pushback around like the hybrid and the workplace and where we work and how we work, that is actually the next phase where they're trying to undo the new normal. And people are now going through the same change challenge that they had at the beginning of the pandemic of trying to cope with the new normal and that being adjusted and needing to change again.
Well, prior to the pandemic, there were signs that some employee engagement, especially in the nonprofit sector, was slipping and that organizations weren't successfully managing workplace mental health. Did the pandemic magnify trends that were already happening, or did it bring solutions to problems that weren't really being recognized until the pandemic brought them to light?
That's a really good question. Like really engagement was an issue that very much predates COVID and the pandemic. So employee engagement was an ongoing issue. Um, so it was exacerbated, certainly in a lot of places, depending on how it was handled, how people handled the lockdown, how they handled care for their employees, how they responded. So some workplaces will have suffered a lot more than others because they just didn't handle the whole impact of the pandemic and everything that was required from them very well. In terms of how they treated people and how they cared for their people. So in that sense, that would have exacerbated some of the issues. But I think also what has really changed is the workplace, the relationship to work, and how people work, how they integrate it in their life. Because I kind of compare it to, going to live in a different country, in a different culture for, X amount of time, where you just naturally start picking up those things. You're shocked, then you kind of make your peace with it. And then when you go back to your home country, you realize how much you've changed and that things have rubbed off on you. And I think that is definitely affecting some of the engagement challenges now, because people have seen a different way. And there's more empowerment for employees in relationship to employers now.
So are you seeing organizations and leaders really fall back to the pre-pandemic solutions and their attitudes that already weren't working at the time? What kind of new solutions do you think really need to be explored?
Okay, so yes, definitely. And we see that in the news, right? Where we see like, oh, CEO so-and-so has ordered everybody back to the office and this, that. And so, yeah, so I think what's happening, and this is, what people do when there's disruption, they try and go back to what they know and what was previously working for them. So what you find is that a lot of organizations are trying to go back to disciplinary authoritarian way of, do it our way. This is what we need. And you're beholden to us and must do it the way that we want you to do it. Even though a lot of our, the myths have been shattered, it's been proven people are equally productive at home as they are in the workplace. And in many cases, actually more productive. So there's a lot of these myths that have been shattered, but that's really disrupted the relationship with managers, their ability for people to kind of control their employees and have that as a community of work. So they're kind of falling back a lot on the disciplinary thing. And when you're talking about new solutions, it's not new solutions, Mary. It's new opportunities to put in solutions that were always there. Always, it's always been there. Engagement, what brings people engagement? Soft skills, care, listening, and, bringing, involving people, giving them autonomy, giving them respect, taking care of them, having their back. These are not new ideas. And that has really come to the foreground. And so in my mind, we're really at an amazing tipping point in a crossroads where, because everything has been so disrupted and we really don't have a mold yet, we can create the mold. And if you've got a good employer and a creative employer, they can create a new mold for how the workplace, relates to its employees.
Well, I'd really like to dig in a little deeper about the sort of workplace reentry, that organizations are really making decisions about how employees return to work, either hybrid or a full return, or in other cases, a more permanent continuation of remote work. How do you think this impacts employees' mental health, if at all? Are there really particular challenges related to the different approaches, if not even, the manner in which they will work, but also how that reintroduction occurs? What do leaders have to watch out for?
Well, I think the leaders need to there's a couple of different things there. So the impact is going to be different for different people in how they do that. Because what we're seeing is that young people in particular, they actually want to be in the workplace because it's really hard for them to be working in isolation. Like if you're onboarding, if you're learning a new job or a new position and new skills, it's very hard to do that in isolation. So that's where it's affecting young people to be working away, working remote. Whereas what we're seeing is that, and that what you keep reading, what we keep seeing is that the remote work and eliminating the remote work is particularly disadvantaged for women in a number of different ways, because women have continued, however much you would like to think it's different, they have continued to always remain like the primary caregiver. So a lot of the caregiving responsibilities, and what we saw there, I just read a piece of research that was showing, what do people do with the time that they saved on the commute? And they found that, of the people, that women in particular, they spend more time caregiving. But a lot of people actually spend that commute time working longer and harder for the company. So it's a disadvantage for women because it puts them, again, in a more stressful situation. And of course, when you're not in the workplace, it's harder to get access and to build your career. And again, because particularly women that benefit from working away from the workplace, it also puts them at a disadvantage in terms of being able to continue to build their career, to have access to that networking that they need. So there's a lot of different pieces to this, and different groups are affected differently in how they work. And obviously, loneliness has been an issue ongoing. And I think in bringing people into the workplace or hybrid, I don't think those are actually the issues. Hybrid or work from home or how many days or where you work and what you work, these are bargaining positions. It's not actually reflective of the underlying interest. What are the underlying needs that are being met by that? And it's different for the different demographics of the groups. So really it's about, listening to your people and finding what is the demographic of your group. What do they need? Why are they so stuck on wanting to work from home? And is there a way that if you need them in the workplace, or if you want to give them the opportunity to come to the workplace, what do you need to do? So I don't see that as the actual issue, whether they're hybrid or in the workplace or work from home. Those are bargaining positions, not the actual underlying interests.
That's very interesting. Now, when it comes to mental health, is there a common area where you're seeing organizations are getting things wrong, especially as we emerge from the pandemic, where they're contributing to creating an environment that negatively impacts their staff's mental health?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and it's understandable because this is what people do. They always go back to what they know and what they thought worked before. So I think when organizations think that they can go back to the way it was, that's where they're making a big mistake. They're trying to put a square peg into a round hole. And, I think they're going to have to understand, I think hustle culture is declining. It's coming to its end. That concept that, that was certainly in North America, perpetuate a lot, that always on culture. With the work from home, that has really changed, and the pandemic has really brought people to a point of reevaluating what's important in my life, what is balance, what do I need in my life, and what do I want from my employer. And so if they think they can go back to the way things were, it's to their own peril if they're going to try and squeeze that and make people do that. So I think that's where they get it wrong. And I think also, and again, this is, what most people do when there's change and disruption. First, they go back to what worked before. The other thing is that the last word is not said. Even what we decide now, what works for this moment in time, that is going to evolve. That is also, there is no existing best practice. So they're developing good practice and emergent practice to deal with these changed workplace relations, new employees, and everything else that's going on in society. Because it's not just, the workplace is not just dealing with this issue around hybrid and workplace. They're also dealing with with the recession. They're dealing with environmental issues. They're dealing with so many other things that are relevant to their employees that it's quite complicated and complex situation. And so they need to be aware of the fact that, and be creative with, understanding that what they do today may not work tomorrow, and that it may change and evolve, because we don't really know how it's going to work out. If we do all hybrid or all work from home, we don't really know what the next step is. And that's, I think, if they think that that's what's going to happen, that it's a done deal, I think that's a big mistake.
And where does the national standard on psychological health and safety come into play in the workplace?
I love that you asked that, Mary. Because, I love the standard. I think it is phenomenal. And it's everywhere. How can it not come into play in this whole thing? Because what I'm seeing is that, when I say bargaining positions versus interests and needs, these are the things that have always played in terms of engagement and productivity. All those factors that are covered in the national standard, respect in the workplace, support in the workplace, care, autonomy, having the tools to do what you need to do, clarity and understanding about what your tasks are. All of these pieces that are described in the psychological health and safety standard, all these elements, these are the things that people have always wanted and that have always been right in front of our nose in terms of what do you need to do to create engagement and to have people be productive. So how can it not be part of it? It is underlying to me. It is the solution.
So for organizations who want to implement a workplace mental health strategy, potentially embracing the things in the national standards on psychological health and safety, where do you suggest they start? And what does something like this entail?
Okay, so there's different ways that they can do it. If it's actually an organizational position where the organization from the top down has made this decision, then they need to start with, for instance, in Canada, going to the Guarding Minds at Work. Guarding Minds at Work is a phenomenal resource that gives a survey that they can do, kind of like a pre-survey that allows them to see what is their readiness for change. That's one of the things that they can do. And then there's a survey that they can put out with their employees to kind of see, where do we sit? How are we doing on these different elements? There's 13 aspects of psychological health and safety. You don't need to address all of them all at once, but it will give them a handle to decide, okay, here's where our friction points are. Here are things that we can put things, make some actions and start working towards it, because it's not a one-day thing. So my suggestion is first look at, where am I? What am I doing? Am I ready to change? And then making the commitment to move forward, not, overnight, making the commitment to say, okay, this is our plan over time. This is where we want to go. This is how we monitor where we're going. And they can do that with an outside person, with a third party that manages and consults with them on that, or they can do it internally. A lot of regions and municipalities have people internally in their HR department that are responsible for psychological health and safety, and that will do that monitoring and keeping an eye on that and doing the survey, because it's not the same as a satisfaction survey. This is it's really about those 13 elements that are really actually quite concrete and can be operationalized in the workplace around, what does that look like? Respect in the workplace. What does diversity in the workplace look like? So that's, I think, where they really want to start, by looking at that.
And for leaders who are directly managing people, what are some strategies they could implement right away to better support their staff, or even to be able to be alert to the signals that somebody might have issues?
Yeah. Okay, so that's really the ICU, not intensive care. ICU, look at people and start to look at their employees as human beings and treating them as such. And I'm not saying that they're, they treat them like machines, but really, taking the effort to communicate, to listen, to involve, people. And it can be done. I was, met with a group of managers in a bank, and this particular organization had a culture that really fostered that. And so when I started talking about engaging and motivating people through ICU, like really that concept of approaching people as individuals, not just as employees, which is there's no such thing as an employee. It's a human being that does work for you, or that you have a kind of contractual relationship with. They do that, and they take the time, and they also see the payoff of doing that, because people are engaged. It was an incredibly joyful group of people, because they took that perspective. So really it's about, you can start on a very small level with all of those things of, respect. How do I show respect? Please and thank you. Boundaries by not, how do I set my meetings, and at what time do I set my meetings? How do I do care? Maybe there's things that I implement in the workplace that are around, making sure that people take their breaks, or that we organize like a walk. You don't need the CEO to tell you that it's okay to go for a walk with your people over lunch break, or to say please and thank you, or to ask somebody about, well, how's your kid doing? Like last time we talked, your kid had croup. How are they doing? Those are the small things that make the difference, that create the community that people want and make them feel like they are actually seen as people. So it's not that hard.
Right. It's really that seen as people is connecting with the human, and bring them empathy and understanding and connectiveness to build that relationship that supports that knowledge that the manager could possibly have, where things might be going wrong with somebody, or understanding them better to provide them with better supports.
Yeah. And if they want to look at the signs, you're looking at, has somebody changed? So this is the whole, ICU, to see if somebody has changed, if their participation in the workplace has changed, if their punctuality has changed, or the quality of their work, or the amount of their productivity, how much work they're able to put out. If that has changed over an ongoing period of time, and it's a recurring issue, at that point you want to reach out and say, okay, so I've noticed this. What's going on? How can I help? What can you do for yourself? And how can I help? It doesn't mean that the employer is fully responsible, or that the employee is not accountable for their performance and their commitment to the employer, but it can be done in a positive way. The ICU, let's work together on shared problem solving.
Well, it seems like we're certainly in a better place than we were a year ago when we last discussed this topic in the midst of the pandemic. And there are much more positive kinds of trends that seem to be happening. But as we wrap up, are there any tools or resources or any final words of advice you'd like to share with our audience of nonprofit professionals, or for their leaders who are trying to tackle this problem of trying to maintain a healthy environment, but still try to get back to some normal practices and in their workplace? What kind of advice would you have for them, or any sort of resources you might like to point to?
Okay, so there's a lot of different things that they can do. First, they can go to places like Guarding Minds at Work. They can go. Even the government of Canada has a really great, PDF that you can download and online. What is psychological health and safety? That is a really great resource just to get an understanding. What is stress? What is good stress? What is bad stress? How does it affect people? And that is really also related to the workplace. So that is just in terms of informing yourself and starting to play around with the idea. If it's a new concept, so because the big change that entails is not just sending people for individual support. And this is where I feel often like a broken record. A lot of the solutions that people do, and when you said earlier, are they going back to the old fashioned solutions? The old solution is, well, this person is stressed out. Let's go send them on a stress management course. And we're not going to look at the fact that they're stressed out because of what's going on in the workplace. And if anything, this is a amazing point in time in history for organizations to actually look at themselves and to make some changes. And it doesn't have to be earth shattering. It's a process that ripples, and they make decisions, that slowly move forward. So it doesn't have to be like blowing the whole thing up. It's really letting that ripple effect, and each step will guide you to the next step. So that's one of the things. So the Guarding Minds at Work and the Government of Canada piece about psychological health and safety, that's a really nice way to start thinking about, looking at the organization as both as part of the problem and part of the solution as an organization, not putting it all on the individual. One of the things, of course, also is that this requires some skills and overcoming anxiety. Because, when I deal with managers, they're often of really good intent. They really mean well. They're crunched and stressed, and it's really hard to talk to distressed employees because it's, it could touch home. They don't really have the tools on how to deal with those things. So some of the things that organizations can do also is, reach out to their EAP for manager consultations, promote taking advantage of the manager consultations that employee assistance programs offer, the trainings, the manager trainings that they often offer. Those are introductory. They're not really skill development, but they certainly get people going and thinking about things that they could do differently. And then there's coming to like some of the webinars on Charity Village that are, excellent resources for people to start their mind thinking and to ask themselves, could I do this differently? Where can I start? What could I do? There's other places. If they're strapped for cash, there's places like Acumen Academy, that have a lot of free courses. There's a lot of things that you can find that are not going to be high cost. And all you need to do then, especially with nonprofits, maybe what you do is you find a free course, but you give people the time to go and do it during work hours, and you work together with them in the workplace to process what they're learning in this course. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this.
Well, Rensia, as always, it's such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for sharing your insights and your wealth of experience and knowledge of the challenges and solutions our audience of nonprofit professionals could benefit from. It's so appreciated. Thanks for joining us again on CharityVillage Connects.
Thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate. Thank you.